Today we have this simple project called Pet News. It's all about sending emails with random dog and cat pictures to subscribers. What we want to do is to implement a test for this simple function here. As you can see, it calls the API client twice. First to get a random dog picture and second to get a random cat picture. Then it composes them into a message that is later sent using mailer to the provided address. We already have some very basic test created for this function. It just asserts that the function returns the OK atom. Let's see how it works. I call mix test and it succeeds. But you can also see the logger output here because our mailer module logs the message sent. You can see that it's sent to more pictures at example.com. It has the subject latest pet news and the body is right here. And when I run it again, the links change. They're random after all. Now, our goal here is to make this test more useful. Basically, I'd like to check if the email we send is correct and that it's actually passed to the mailer module. There are a few things to figure out first though. How to get access to email content from our test module, how to verify it's correct if part of it is random, how to avoid calling the real API or sending the actual email during tests, as it can be slow and unreliable. Let's find out. So going back to the solution, we're about to use Mimic, the library that helps us create so-called mocks that will replace our real function calls. Let's get into practice now. First, we'll add Mimic to mix.exs file and run mixsteps.get. Next, we need to call Mimic copy for each module we want to use with Mimic. I will do that inside test helper. So let's start with API client. Now in our test module, we call use Mimic to make its functions available here, and then we use the expect function. Expect takes a few parameters. First is the module that we're creating mock for. Then the function name. We'll start with getRandomDoc, and finally the function that will be called instead. This function takes no parameters and it should return a tuple with OK atom and the URL. We'll use some kind of example URL. Now when we run our test, you can see that the doc URL was replaced by our example one. Cool. And we didn't even have to change the send news function. We can basically do the same for the cat URL, but first I'll convert it into a pipe syntax, so it's more readable for multiple calls. Then I'll pipe it to the next expect call, and now both URLs are replaced. Perfect. And thanks to the changes we've just made, make it much easier to test the message content, because it's always the same. But how to get to that message content? You may have guessed that we'll use another expect call, this time to replace our mailer and check the arguments that it receives. Let's have a look at the mailer's deliver function call. It takes three parameters: email address, subject, and message body. So again, we need to provide function with the same signature, email address, then there's latest pet news subject, and finally our expected message. And it's going to return just OK atom. Now for our expected message, we know quite well what it's going to be, as it's always the same now. Don't forget those pin operators here. Otherwise, toEmail and expected message would be interpreted as parameter names and not static strings that we expect. Cool, let's see how it works. As you can see, we get an error that our mailer module has not been copied. It's good to know that Mimic checks if we didn't forget something. We'll add mailer here. Great, now everything works fine. And finally, let's check, for example, what will happen if we change something in our message here. Nice, it catches the error. What's cool about the expect function is that it not only verifies that parameters match the expected ones, but also it can return whatever we want. This lets us simulate various conditions. For example, we can simulate an error here and check how our function behaves. It would be much harder to do with the real mailer service. As you can see, after all those changes, we are checking if our mail content is correct now. We made sure to replace random URLs with constant ones, so it makes comparing the content easier. And we don't rely on external services like external APIs or email anymore. Great, basically we're good. But there are a few more helpful functions that I'd like to cover quickly here. The first one is called stub. We can basically replace our expect here with a call to the stub function, and it seems to work the same at the first glance. But we can see the difference if we, for example, call our API client again. Contrary to expect function, it still works. That's because stub doesn't require the function to be called the exact number of times. We can call it 5 times, we can not call it at all. Finally, we have something called stub with, and we can use it to replace the entire module. For that, we need to define such module. Let's call it API client stub. Then we can define the functions that will replace the real ones. So we create getRandomDocPicture function and a similar function for cats. Now we can replace this piece of code with a call to stub with function, where we provide the real module and the stub module as parameters. Great, works the same. But now we can reuse this module in other tests. It is just a matter of calling this one simple function. By the way, it also verifies that we don't call any of the functions that don't exist in the stub. So if I remove one, it verifies that getRandomCatPicture is not called. Perfect. To summarize, use expect when calls are required, stub when calls are optional, and stub with when you want to replace the entire module. If you want to find out more about Mimic, check the official documentation here on Hexdocs. And that's all for today. Thank you. If you have any suggestions or ideas for the future videos, let me know in the comments. Bye.